To what is going on in Afghanistan. The Taliban have announced their interim government in Afghanistan. The reign of terror has begun. Pakistan ISI's pick, Mullah Mohammad Hassan Akhund, will be the new Afghan Prime Minister. Akhund and UN designated terrorist. The cabinet consists of at least 5 ministers who are terrorists. There is no woman, understandably, it's the Taliban cabinet, and has Pakistan's ISI's imprint written all over.
The Taliban announced its new government Tuesday, naming Mullah Hassan Akhund, an associate of the movement's late founder, Mullah Omar, as acting prime minister. Akhund was a foreign minister and then deputy prime minister during the Taliban's rule in the late 90s. Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar will be deputy. Baradar was responsible for attacks on coalition forces, according to the UN, and served 8 years in prison in Pakistan. Later, he became one of the group's most prominent political leaders in the peace talks with the United States. The new interior minister will be Shirazuddin Haqqani, son of the founder of the Haqqani Network, which is designated as a terrorist organization by the United States. The Taliban have repeatedly sought to reassure Afghans and foreign countries that they will not return to the brutality of their last reign 2 decades ago, marked by punishments and the barring of women and girls from public life. But Tuesday's announcement that a group of established Taliban figures would be filling prominent governing roles did not appear to signal a brand new start. Nor did the group's response to protest earlier in the day when Taliban gunmen fired into the air to scatter protesters in Kabul, as hundreds of men and women shouted slogans like, "Long live the resistance."
These people, the Taliban, are very unjust and they are not human at all. They do not give us the right to demonstrate. They're not Muslims but infidels. As you can see, the situation we are in.
All right, viewers, I want to now cut across to somebody who's had a very, very close connection with Afghanistan. He's written books on Afghanistan, many papers. Joining me right now is William Dalrymple, author and historian. Mr. Dalrymple, appreciate you joining us on News Today. Now,
hi, good evening. How are you?
Very well, sir. Good evening. How are you doing? Thank you
so much.
Thank you for taking out the time and joining us on News Today, sir. But I want to begin, with the fact that your work, your book, The Return of the King, The Battle for Afghanistan, has taken you to Afghanistan multiple times. And this time around, with what you've seen go down, how do you view it? I'm sure you've got friends there, you've met people, you've seen the culture. How have you viewed it all?
Well, it's obviously an enormously tragic chain of events. It's tragic for the Afghan people. It's tragic for their allies. It's tragic for the United States, for the reputation of NATO. It's tragic for Britain, my own country, and it's hugely tragic for the regional standing of India, who've lost a major ally. And it's certainly seen by Pakistan as a major victory for them. And in all these things, it's a huge disaster that was easily avoidable. I'm not at all optimistic. I do not think the Taliban have changed fundamentally from what they were before. They're a little bit more PR savvy. They're probably a little more coherent and organized than they used to be. But they remain fundamentally a hugely retrograde, backward force. They are headed by largely uneducated mullahs who are barely literate, who are lacking in the sort of education that leaders like Hamid Karzai, Abdullah, or Ashraf Ghani all had. I mean, Abdullah and Ashraf Ghani were both PhD holders, majorly brilliant men who could begin to hold Afghanistan's problems and come to some sort of solution. These people are simply, I would imagine, incapable of doing so. And the only gainer from this, I think, is China, who is likely to replace America as the principal hegemon in the region now.
Yeah, Mr. Dalrymple, I want to hark back to the research that you've done, because I was reading parts of, I have to admit I haven't read The Return of the King, but I did read parts of it before this interview. I must, yes. But before this, I did. But, in my preparation for this interview, I did read parts of it. And, it was interesting because you did... Because you did point out that that the Afghans have constantly been pawns and manipulated by foreign Western diplomacy. It's pretty much how it went down, even, with the way US retreated.
So, in a sense, what's happened is no surprise at all. The speed is obviously a surprise and the actual timing now. But what happened is exactly what I said would happen 10 years ago when Return of a King was published. I predicted the fall of this government. I predicted that China was going to replace America as the principal power in that region, and it still happened. It wasn't inevitable that it could happen. Hamid Karzai proved a man of not without his failings, but a man of huge diplomacy and charm, who was able to operate a big tent, which was able to include many different worlds that inhabit Afghanistan. Afghanistan, like India, is a country with many different ethnic groups, many different languages, many different religions, and many different geographies. But the sheer the mountainous tribal nature of Afghanistan has meant that no power has ever found it easy to organize centralized control. And for most of Afghan history, since the time of Ahmad Shah Durrani, Afghanistan has been really in the power of regional warlords and regional governors rather than the central government in Kabul. And that's true as much of Afghan rulers as it has been for foreign occupiers. And the question remains now whether the Taliban will be able to actually cohere. We've seen already divisions between regional commanders, East and West, and divisions between the Doha political elite, the Rehbari Shura, and the soldiers on the ground. And for the moment, it's looking rather as if the Conservatives are winning over the more refined political negotiators at Doha, who are promising all sorts of inclusive government.
Mr. Dalrymple, you talk about the ethnicities that exist in Afghanistan, pretty much like India, but there seems to be an Indian identity. For people who are viewing Afghanistan, what is the Afghan identity? For somebody who's traveled to the region, who knows the region, what is the actual Afghan identity? Because you keep getting lost in Pashtun, Hazara, all of that.
Well, in India too, one has people with strong regional identities, such as the Tamils or the Malus or the Bengalis, but it doesn't mean they're not Indian. In the same way, you can be Hazara or Pashtun or Tajik, but also be an Afghan. And those tribal boundaries that form Afghanistan are quite old now. Ahmad Shah Durrani was kicking off in the 1750s. That's a long time ago. And the boundaries are firm. People do think of themselves as Afghan. The trouble is they also think of themselves very much in their regional identities. And as so much of Indian politics, it's balancing the power of the regions with the power of the centre. At the moment, we have a very powerful central government. There have been regions, moments as recently as a decade ago when it seemed like regional powers were spinning off from the centre and doing their own thing. And that has always been the case in Afghan history. There's been very little strong central control.
Mr. Dalrymple, before I let you go, I want to ask you, because it's, I've been reading up a lot in terms of women rights in Afghanistan, because if you go back to the 1919 or the 1920, women were most liberal. I would reckon Afghanistan was one of the first few countries where women could actually vote, much earlier than I would reckon Europe or any other country. How have you seen a change? Because you've studied it.
Well, Afghan women, like Indian women, are enormously strong. And the bravery of the women we've seen on the streets of Herat, Mazar and Kabul over the last week shows it's going to be no easy thing to keep them locked up inside in the way that sometimes they were in the past. But at the end of the day, the Taliban men have M16 rifles and can shoot people. The women do not. And the resistance has crumbled. And I suspect for the time being, the Taliban are going to have things their way for the foreseeable future, particularly if they get an open check from China, which looks increasingly likely. The noises we've been hearing from both China and from the Taliban indicate that a very close alliance is being forged there. And if the Chinese do invest heavily, spend on roads and infrastructure like they say they're going to, I think there's very little that the outside world can actually do now to alter things, very tragically.
I appreciate you joining us. Thank you. I wish we had more time. We could have chatted more, especially with your friend Amarullah Saleh, whether you're in touch with him already or not, because I was reading a paper.
I've been in touch with Karzai, but not with Amarullah lately. He's out of touch in the Panjshir and still fighting by all accounts.
All right, well, let's hope he's well. Appreciate you joining us, sir. Thank you.